Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Hope everyone is
Walaikum.
doing well. Oh, sorry. Yeah, I'm talking to you, aren't
I
I?
thought I thought I was gonna say wa alaikum salam. But you just carried on there.
Okay, yeah, go on. You say wa alaikum salam then.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, as you like to say.
Wa barakatuh. Yeah, man, wa barakatuh. Salam is a deep thing, man. We'll let at least one person come into the live studio. And once they come in, we'll ask them to all say salam as well, inshallah. Oh, Sahil's here. Assalamu alaikum, Sahil. How are you? Anyway, so people are coming in. Alhamdulillah. I didn't realize people are coming in. So I'm Habib Ahmad, and today, Alhamdulillah, we have Imad Chaudary from Manchester, Dr. Imad Chaudary. And inshallah, we'll start with Imad telling us a bit about himself, who he is, where he studied, and why he's sitting in the car, and why it's so dark in his car. And then we'll move on, inshallah, to what we're talking about today. Ji Imad.
Okay, so Assalamu alaikum. I'm Imad. I studied at Darul Uloom Bolton. I did my Hifth and Alim course there for approximately 10 years. And after that, I went on to study at university. I'm studying medicine at the moment. I'm in the fourth year, and I also teach. I sort of try to do various things in Islamic studies. I'm into academia at the moment, writing, hopefully trying to publish. And yeah, that's a bit about myself, I suppose.
What are you trying to publish, Imad?
So at the moment, my area of interest is Islamic bioethics. So I
Okay.
know I've had loads of conversations with you about that, but as we go along, hopefully I'll be able to share what that actually is, what it means, and how it affects people. Because I think,
Yeah,
given my training, I think this is a really effective way to make a change in the world, and this is why I'm personally interested in it.
mashallah. I think here on the screen, Doctor, we've got Brother Ramali, who's a doctor as well. He's a Sri Lankan consultant in Colchester, so he'll
Oh,
probably be
mashallah.
interested in your medical studies.
Yeah.
Um, but mashallah, go a bit deeper into your Islamic studies, man. What have you studied Islamically? That
Okay.
was
So my Islamic studies actually comprise of the uh, basic sort of education that we receive generally in the UK in the Darul Uloom setting, which is the study of Arabic language primarily and understanding and focusing on the Quran. Then moving on to Islamic jurisprudence, which are the do's and don'ts in Islam, primarily focused on one school of thought, and then sort of learning the evidences and branching out and understanding sort of the reasoning behind why particular rulings are made. And I think that was really interesting. I spoke to someone a few days ago uh, regarding the study of Islamic legal theory and how it's so boring for people. And Islamic legal theory is sort of not looking at the rulings, but how the rulings are extracted from the scripture, from the Quran and Hadith. And
mm,
I was speaking to them about Islamic bioethics as well, and how sort of we need a re-evaluation of the scripture in Islamic bioethics. And if I hadn't had interest in Islamic legal theory back then, usulul fiqh, then it would have been a lot more difficult for me. And I had a lot of interest in Islamic legal theory, even though people found it really a really dry subject, usul shashi. So people found
mm.
that really, a really dry subject. For some reason, I had interest in it. I don't really know why, but Alhamdulillah, that
Yeah.
helped
So what
helped
year did you
later down
study
the
that?
line.
What
That
year
was
do
in
you
the
do
third
sort of?
year. That was in the third year. I
Ah,
said usul
hmm.
shashi. I think before that
Yeah.
we did a book by Akram Nadwi, Dr. Akram Nadwi, Al Mabadi
Mm,
fi Usul al Fiqh. It's from his Mabadiyat series,
mm,
introductory series. I think we studied that in year two. That gave a bit more of an introduction to Usul al-Fiqh than Usul al-Shashi, because Usul al-Shashi is like a really cryptic text, if you like, where you have to work out what the text is trying to say, like the wording of the text. You have to decipher it and then understand
mm.
sort of what the
I think the
masail and
Arabic's
what the
quite hard.
content actually
Yeah,
is.
man. That's true.
Yeah.
Anyway, man. So Usul Shashi, just to kind of break this down a little bit, Usul Shashi is a book and usul means the principles. Shashi is his name.
Yeah.
Okay, that didn't help
Yeah.
explain what the book's about. The book's primarily about the kind of the whole field of deriving. Yeah, how do you? We've got the source, we've got the Quran, we've got the Sunnah, but like, how do you decide what the actual rules of Islam are? And that book's designed to kind of aid you with that, although it's not the most direct kind of way of doing it, and not that simple either. But yeah, man. Anyway, um, yeah, what else is going on, Imad, man, in at the moment?
About usul or in general?
No, just generally, man.
Okay, in general. Not much really. I'm in Manchester at the moment, so I study in Brighton, which is a town or is a city. I think it's a city actually. It's a couple 1.5 hours away from London, not too far from London, about an hour on the train. But I'm down in Manchester now because we had an unfortunate. So my mum's aunt, so my great aunt, she is really unwell. Well, she's on the last stages of her life. They
Mm,
removed the ventilator, which is the machine that helps someone breathe. They removed that yesterday, and they're just waiting for her to sort of peacefully leave the world. As she's taking her last breaths
mm,
of life. So she
inna
has
lillah.
been for the last day or so. So that's why I'm in the car at the moment because we have like
Mm,
loads of people in the house. We're just trying to like my
inshallah.
extended family have come down and sort of trying to help their immediate family in sort of like cooking and other things so
Inna
they don't have
lillah.
to worry about it.
Mm,
So
okay.
yeah, that's
Just
why I'm in the
if you
car.
can, just if can you just move a bit closer to the mic, just a little bit. It was blurring up a
Okay,
little bit, but anyway, Jazakallah for that.
sure.
So, your great aunt, inshallah, will all make dua for her,
Inshallah.
inshallah. And even here in Colchester, like we had a death as well. I know the Colchester people would know that in Colchester we had a young man actually pass away. He was 30 years old. And obviously, because he was 30, nobody expected it. It was kind of sudden, and that was a real wake up call for a lot of the people in Colchester. Really, just the way that death can come at any time, and like you can go deep on death, but I think like we often, because we kind of don't like death for a few reasons, and we're a bit scared of death, and we think like we're not very happy even discussing death all the time. And I'm not quite sure why always, but we're very scared of death. And death in itself, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam obviously says that remember it because it will detach you from the world. And when you think of it like that, like sometimes it's actually a good exercise. It's a useful exercise. Just as a takeaway from this podcast, to actually think about your own death. That at one point there's going to be a day where obviously we're going to actually have our name on the gravestone or on the coffin. And it's going to be our family trying to get us buried as soon as possible. So I think whenever that kind of happens, it's very important to actually um, be able to. It's very important to actually be able to, bring that awareness to ourselves, so that when a death does happen, if a death happens in our family, in our vicinity, in our city, it's actually a reminder for us rather than just some incident which happens. But yeah, I think that's hopefully enough introductions. And we'll move on to today's topic. So today's topic is on the screen. And the main thing we really wanted to get through, which is something which I've is one of my favorite topics. But whenever you start trying to teach a subject, especially and more so, this problem comes up when it happens to be an Islamic subject. And the problem is people being scared of making mistakes. And the way I come across this personally, most of the time, is when you're trying to teach a child or even an adult to recite the Quran, for example, to take the simplest example, and you're trying to get them to slow down. You're trying to get them to bring their attention to the letters. You're trying to get them to give a bit of love to the Quran, and they're just all tensing up. So very often you'll be like, slow down. They'll be speeding up. They'll be running away from the letters instead of coming into the letters. And what I've realized is very often the reason for that is because they've been kind of brainwashed into being scared of making mistakes. um, and I think hopefully as we go through, we'll come up with some ways to try and reverse that as we get older, and how as parents we can try and make sure that we don't affect our kids negatively because of that mindset. But I'll let Dr. Imad share any of his experiences. Like while you've been teaching, have you noticed, like specifically whether it's Islamic teaching or even other teaching, that kind of the idea of making a mistake is something which people kind of shy away from rather than actually embracing the mistakes which they're making.
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, I'm fortunate to be able to teach people of all ages actually, and I've been teaching since I was studying myself, and I still consider myself a student, not that I've completed anything. But I teach the Quran, I teach Islamic studies. I also teach things which are not necessarily Islam. I teach the 11 plus, and I know Imam Habib also teaches 11 plus or has done in the past, right?
Yeah,
Hello. Yeah. So it's
yeah,
just,
yeah, definitely.
and I think the way the approaches are to teaching in general is that obviously that the title that we have, the mistake of fearing mistakes, that children are conditioned really early on to fear making mistakes, and sort of mistakes being a bad thing, whereas a mistake is an opportunity for a person to learn. A mistake is an opportunity for you to see where you went wrong and sort of develop yourself so you don't make that again. And obviously, this is so echoed by the hadith of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and even learning the reason why when we're in a class setting and someone else makes a mistake and their mistake can actually be valuable for you, and you can um, sort of improve yourself by someone else's mistake. The Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam is reported to have said, "As-sa'idu man wu'idha li ghayrihi." That, the fortunate person is
Mm,
he who takes admonishment and takes something good out of the mistakes of someone else. So not only your own mistakes, but the mistakes of the people in your class, you can take that as something positive and something to sort of drive yourself forward. And I found this obviously, I think we were talking about this the other day about at what point does a child start to realize that mistakes are bad?
mm.
Because when a child sort of first develops as a toddler, they start trying to walk, and then they fall down and they try again, and then they fall down and they try again. I know this is your example that still, but what is the point then where, oh, you made a mistake? No, you shouldn't have done that. At what point and what point in life do we have where mistakes are bad? So what
Mm.
point is that? That's a question for you,
That's
Mom
a
Habib.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think just before, I don't know the answer, man. I'm not going to pretend I know the answer. But I think we see a reverse of fitrah. So just before I move on, I just want to repeat the hadith which you said. How does the hadith start?
As-sa'idu.
Sa'ido. Okay, okay. So
As-sa'idu.
a fortunate person, lucky person,
Yeah, a fortunate person. Man wu'idha بغيره أو
is
كما
he
قال
who
عليه.
is advised, or he who takes lessons from others' mistakes.
Yeah,
I think we can paraphrase that in it. He who
yeah.
takes lessons from the mistakes of others. Hopefully, we can
And
add that
I
on the
think
screen.
if you take this philosophy in life where, you know, where you approach this with this mindset where you're analyzing the world, and the Nabi
Mm,
Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam also said that a believer is the person who doesn't fall in the same hole twice,
mm,
right? They from their own
yeah.
mistakes. So the Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam taught us to sort of learn from the mistakes of others as well as learning from our own mistakes. So I think
Mm,
this is really
yeah.
important as well, that the believer doesn't fall in the same hole twice, and this is also a very authentic hadith of the Messenger
Seeing as
sallallahu
we're
alaihi
on, seeing as we're on a hadith, well, there's another hadith which is more direct. Like a lot of people may misquote this. The thing is, this hadith, I think people are a bit more reserved about using this hadith in the mistakes category because كل بني آدم خطاء وخير الخطائين التوابون. But I think some people, even
wasallam.
if you take that first part, every human is going to خطاء, be a repeated mistake maker. a continuous mistake maker, depending on what bab you put that in. And as well, it's not just making mistakes, and that's great, but also the Prophet ﷺ's advice is that as well as making mistakes, the best of you who make mistakes from all of you are those who then come back and repent and learn essentially from those mistakes. I think doing tawbah is a sign that you have learned from the mistake.
Yeah.
So
Because
that
Tawbah in
that
essence is returning, isn't it? Tawbah in
yeah
essence is returning, and it's interesting that you use the hadith in that context, because we always hear this hadith in the context of sin, and for you to sin Islamically, and make go, but it is a mistake. Al khata in the Arabic language is a mistake
yeah
that you make, slip of the foot that you make. That sort of mistake, and going back to where you were and rectifying that. So it's in our
yeah
tradition. It's central to our tradition to sort of rectify mistakes and build from that. And it's not a bad thing because everyone does it.
yeah
It's something that every single no person is exempt from, except for obviously in terms of sins. The messengers, alayhim salam, this is a point of aqidah, but let's not go into that.
yeah man. Okay, we're gonna. You asked me a question. I forgot what the question was.
I asked you, at what point does a child
Oh, okay, yeah.
or developing
So
human being, at what point do
mm,
they realize that mistakes are bad? Because that wouldn't always be the case, because
mm,
they learn how to sit up, they keep on falling down, sit up, falling down, until they can sit,
yeah
and they learn how to stand by standing, falling down, and then they stand, and then they take their first steps
mm,
and they fall down again, and they take more steps, and until they practice, and they can fully walk. And no one de-learns that. You don't go from walking,
mm,
except obviously if you've got like
yeah
a pathology or some neurological disease. You wouldn't go from walking, I have to put that in,
to, mm,
and then go back to not walking. So at what point do you have like
mm.
a child that learns mistakes are bad?
I think that's a very good question. Again, just before we move on to the question, it's really important to realize that from birth, and again, this now I'm going to allude to the other hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, where he says that kullu mawludin yuladu ala al-fitra, whatever fitra means. Every baby is born on nature, and fitra we know to be some people, Sheikh Albani, for example, he takes the other one. He says al millah, on Islam, believing in
Mm,
Allah, being connected to Allah. But fitra is to basically, if you take more of a Salafi understanding here, it's kind of like if you look at the way Bin Baz explains this hadith, he's like alal hakika. You can't take this hadith on majaz. He'll never say you can be metaphorical in understanding that hadith, and that's very interesting because even from a very literalist perspective, you realize that from birth we have this fitra, this nature within us to actually, be yourself rather than trying to impress because of what you think others want you to do. Um, and this is more of a parenting problem if you think about it, rather than
mm,
um, sometimes we think of this as an educational problem because we have exams, etc. I'm just going to try and see if I can, because we have exams. Um, the
yeah.
exams are what teach kids that mistakes are bad. But if you think of it from a more of a even earlier in the baby's life, it's actually the parent who will be saying that, well, the kid needs to be a certain way or needs to get a certain job. And even you might see this in different cultures, but sometimes the parents, before the baby's born, they've decided he's going to be a doctor or an engineer. No offense to doctors or engineers, but very often
Mhm.
that's what's decided as a baby. And then now anything that takes you off that path, if you happen to not pick up the English alphabet A B C D by the age of 3.5, like your cousin did in America, or like your friends in India memorized the Quran by the age of 7, and you're 11 and you still haven't done half of it. When all that comparison, I think, to answer the question, as soon as that comparison starts happening between you and the way that you are and what other people have achieved, I think that can very often be the starting point of a child being terrified of making a mistake or being behind or not being as good as as cousins or whoever they're being compared with. And I think again that is very unnatural. It puts the child and the baby, toddlers, if it's that young, out of their comfort zone where they don't think they're good enough. and that can actually be that in itself can actually be detrimental. What do you think, Imad?
Definitely. So what did you know about the Bin Baz explanation, al haqiqa? Did you mean that they're
Yeah.
individualistic, as in their own reality, they don't really care what anyone thinks, and they're not tainted by other
Alal
views of them? Is
Haqiqa.
that what you understood by
So
that?
no, no. Bin Baz. I was giving Bin
What did you
Baz's
mean
opinion.
by
So
that?
he's
That's what
like,
I.
so
Okay, what
so
did you
kullu
understand by that?
mawludin
Yeah,
alal haqiqa. So going from kullu mawludin, every baby is born
yeah,
on alal fitra, on the millah, yeah,
okay,
on Islam.
yeah,
So now, okay, so I think a majazi meaning would be that means, well, when babies are born, they're kind of a bit more inclined towards Islam. Hakika would be they're born
okay.
as firm believers in Allah. They're born as Muslims. Um,
Okay. Haqiqa
the,
in contrast to Majaz. I thought you said
yeah.
they're on reality or upon truth. Okay,
No.
so
Sorry,
you took
no.
okay. So
Hakika
you
for
took
majaz.
another meaning from that. You took another meaning from that, as I understood just now, as children being born in a way where they're not tainted by other people's vision of them.
Mm,
That they're not
yeah.
scared. They're not scared
Mm,
to sort of make those mistakes, like whilst trying to sit up or trying to walk. They're not tainted by other visions, other people's views on them, until the parents themselves start making these comparisons. And
yeah.
interestingly, so I'm on my pediatrics rotation. This started this week. So working with kids a lot, and uh, poorly kids. And we have like these growth charts, and everyone who has a baby would know that the red books that you have like a growth chart, and you have like a curve where you have developmental milestones. So when the child first starts to smile, when the first child will first start to sit up, when the child will walk, when the child will first take his first word, and parents are often really scared. Oh, my child, when is my child gonna
Mm,
sort of hit this developmental milestone, because their cousin or my friend's children
mm,
have already hit that developmental milestone. But the pediatrician and the health workers will tell them, the home people who make the home visits, they'd say no, it's every child has its own trajectory. Every child will have his own or her own way of learning how to talk, and that doesn't mirror intelligence. Like my friend, who's one of the most intelligent people I know, mashallah, Wissam, he's mentioning to me the other day that his parents were really scared because he started speaking when he was like 3 or 4 years old, like quite late compared to like his other siblings, and
mm,
quite late compared to his cousins and other families and their friends and stuff. But now, mashallah, he's studying medicine. He's allowed to become a doctor. So that
mm.
so
Is that a good thing?
being late, as in he went through a lot of struggles, and he passed his
Okay.
exams. He
Mashallah.
that exam thing we'll talk about in a bit. But in terms of early on, his
Mm,
parents thought it was a bad thing that he didn't go through the developmental
mm,
milestones the same as everyone else, or at the same time as
mm,
everyone else. But that doesn't reflect on your intelligence, or on where you're going to be in the future. Because as people, not my own understanding of marking of intelligence, but how people sort of view intelligence and success is passing exams, or doing well in
mm,
exams. And this is obviously a very debatable
mm,
topic, but you can do well on exams, and where you're assessed, even though you might have gone through those developmental milestones a bit later. It doesn't really matter when you learned it, as long as you learn it,
mm. Yeah. And even then, I think
right?
the
And
exam
this is the
method,
philosophy.
yeah, I think the exam method is quite flawed in terms of judging somebody's ability to do something, to even learn. Um,
Of course, of
and I
course.
think I'll, as, oh, okay, yeah, as in like, so, and that, so if the parents start off with their own expectations, like you said, their, what was it called? Milestones? What milestones?
It was the developmental milestones.
So the developmental mindset, so the child's kind of meant to do this at this age, and the parents are kind of stressed
Yeah.
out that the child's not doing this. And like, for example, I was at a relative in Pakistan, and this is just something which I saw. So there was a child who was kind of I don't know, man. In Urdu we call it a bit sukkasa. like a bit dry skin. I could thought it was perfectly fine. His mum thought there was something wrong with him. So his mum's like, oh, this one's so sukasa, and he's so doesn't eat anything, and I don't know what's happening to him. It looks like he's gonna die of anorexia. And all the kid was sitting there in the same room as us. So we went as guests to this person's house, and she's saying this about her son. And even then, I just realized, like, very often that might be an exaggerated, slightly extreme example, something I saw. But even in this country, I've seen, even in other people, sometimes the parents are there and the kids are there, and the parents are just judging their kids. Like, this one is the speaking one, this one is the shy one, this one is the spiritual one, this one is the naughty one. And as soon as you've labeled a kid as naughty, I mean,
Yeah,
you've given him an identity which is going to actually, he or she is going to start living up to. And
yeah.
I think that's sometimes
Shararati one.
misunderstood.
This is a side
Yeah.
point from that. Shararati one, stick him in Darul, stick him
Yeah.
in the Islamic studies route, because he needs the shaitan
Mhm.
taken out of him. He needs a metaphorical form of exorcism.
Yeah. But then again, on top of this, I think one of the things I wanted to discuss today was actually the education system, which is, um, so once the parents have decided their own assumptions, then you go on to the education system, which is kind of, make sure you pass in time for your exam. And then if you make a mistake, if you a bit slow, if you find it hard, then that slowness, that difficulty is punished. And I think I just want to bring it slightly more towards learning spiritual things in Islam. And the reason for that is because I think one of the key things which I am given the job of teaching kids is the Quran, or their awareness of Allah, for example, even with adults. And that's got this whole thing around it. So parents very often, they've drilled it into their kids that you must be good at reciting the Quran. How dare you not finish the Quran by the age of 4.5, or however old their oldest kid was when they finished the Quran. And then that's onto the kid. And now the kid, they're in this kind of race to finish the Quran, which they find boring. And e- like, even me as a teacher, I try and make things fun for the kids, but at first there'll always be a resistance, because the teacher before me, or the teacher before them, or even the local imam, or even the parents, they've managed to attach such a negative emotion towards learning Islam, learning the Quran, and like almost like Allah's gonna like descend from his throne and start punishing them straight away as soon as they make a mistake. Sorry, man. I didn't mean that one. We're not going down that today. Where Allah is, but like, as if Allah is going to punish them straight away for that mistake. And I think that can be really detrimental. And then when I come to try and teach them, it's like, even to get them to slow down enough to feel the letter, to recite a letter properly, they're scared, because they prefer to just read it all jumbled up, and rush off and stay tense and everything, rather than actually experiencing the Quran for what it is. I'm not sure whether you've had much of an experience with that, or
I've
whether.
experienced the exact same thing. The resistance towards a teacher, and I'm someone who likes to sort of approach children in a way where I can be friendly with them. I can talk about things that they're interested in with them as well.
Mm,
And I think this is the prophetic method, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, of teaching, where
sallallahu
there's a
alaihi
hadith in the Sahihain, Bukhari and Muslim, where the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam used to go to was it Umair? Oh yeah, Aba Umair, ma fa'ala al-Nughair.
wasallam. Oh,
So
yeah.
one of the companions, he had a younger brother called Umair. Or was it Abu Umair? I can't remember if it was Umair or Abu.
About Umair, yeah, about Umair,
Yeah,
yeah,
so
about Umair. That was a
Ma
nickname.
fa'ala al-Nughair. Oh, that was his nickname. Who was the
I'm pretty
Sahabi?
sure. I don't know, but that was.
I
I'm
can't
sure that was
remember.
his nickname.
Okay,
Because
this hadith is, yeah.
if it was a kid, why would his name be Abu Nurayd?
Yeah, probably. Yeah, that's true. That's true. Unless they're
You know what I
deciding,
mean?
unless they're so controlling that they're deciding the name of the grandchildren before the child is even married. Problem with culture.
Yeah,
Anyway,
nah,
so
I
the
think that
point
was
of
what.
me mentioning this,
Yeah.
yeah. So the point of me
Mm,
mentioning this was, so the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam used to go to this kid, Abu Umaid, and he said, tell him,
mm,
ask him about his bird. He used to have this little pet bird, and he used to like, inquire about the
yeah.
bird. And he said, "Ma fa'ala Nughair? What's up with Nughair? This kind of thing." Messenger Sallallahu Alaihi
yeah,
Wasallam had no like. There's well, he was an adult, right? He was like in Medina at the time. He was like an old man, and he was trying
mm,
to speak to a young child based on the child's own interest, because the child's interest was on having a pet. So the Messenger Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam would kind of,
mm,
entertain that interest of the child. And this is how he got through to young children, and how, and I think the most important part of teaching is getting through to the child. Because if you're going to teach something, and if you have, the best amount of knowledge, the best way of teaching something, and you have the optimal method. Sometimes I think that myself, like wrongly, that, oh yeah, I have the best method, and I need to, put all this knowledge onto the child, because it's so important that they have this, and I get a bit
mm,
overexcited sometimes. But if you can't get through to the child, then that's all,
mm,
kind of
mm.
useless. So I think
I
the
think,
most
yeah,
important
but
step
then
of
I think,
teaching is getting through to the child. And
I
talking
think
about
what's coming.
things that
Mm,
the child is interested in.
I think one of the things that's coming to my mind here is like, if you're a literalist, if you're a bit like Salafi minded, you're going to have very strict rules. You're going to be like, this is allowed, and this is not allowed. Very strict rules, black and white, basically. I think that can be
Yeah,
quite. So, I think especially when you're trying to bring up a child, you're going to have like principles. So one of the things, for example, if I had a child, one of the most important things for me would be the things which are important to me. So for my child would be, I'd want my child to have things which I find important. Does that make sense? If I don't know what's
yeah,
important to me, how am I going to pass that on to the child? And I find this in a lot of parents. They don't know what's important. So they just think Islam is really important, and that means praying 5 times a day. And if you don't, you go to hell. But I think slightly more nuanced Hanafi, holistic approach to Islam. For example, number one thing, the
you love
concept of
that word,
taqwa
holistic.
and and discipline. So like if I personally want to be disciplined, I want my kids to be disciplined. Another thing, courage. Like I want to have courage to do things which I'm scared of, and that's something I definitely want my kids to have. But I think sometimes we get a bit too involved in the nitty gritty, and we forget this. And then because we're so black and white, we actually start boxing the kid in. But when you're open and you have these principles, this child must learn discipline themselves, and you make sure you don't give them a phone until they're disciplined enough to use it. That's not advice. That's just an example. But you make sure that they're learning the skills which you know are important, and once they start doing that, then you're actually operating within some kind of a framework which can actually apply to the child. Otherwise, if we go all black and white, and very often, I think one of the problems which happens with kids in this country, especially because we go to state schools or local schools which don't promote Islam. The physics teacher in my secondary school, and this was quite a few years ago, was quite openly ridiculing any belief in a God. I mean, that was quite normal in physics in school, in Chelmsford. And I'm pretty sure it's normal. I'm sure most of the science teachers in school aren't particularly, even the religious studies teacher in my school wasn't particularly supportive of people who believed in religion. Um, so they go to that kind of an environment. Then they come home and then they have their parents who kind of are apparently believing in Allah, but they don't see that belief in the parents' actions, for example. So if the parents say, "Oh, we believe in Allah, Allah is controlling everything," but then the parents are stressing out and worrying and pretending that everything's out of control, then the parents are saying one thing and telling the kids to believe another thing and to believe
Mm.
understand online a way the parents are. So to I think that can really confuse kids as well. Again, just to that whole story, this whole thing, just to come back to the point that if we're not principled, if we're not holistic, if we haven't got what's the actual principle of Islam, which I have, and we're just all over the place with with loads of little rulings, I think that can really confuse kids. I don't know if that made any sense, but what are you saying, Imad?
I think, yeah, the idea of cognitive dissonance that you sort of explained, where the child sees something different to what's being practiced, is
Mm,
kind of. I think what I mean by this is a child has an idea from the mom and dad. Oh, this is right, this is wrong, and it's interestingly, I'm going to give away some of my teaching secrets as well. So when I first teach children fiqh, or Islamic jurisprudence, I do this exercise where I get blank pieces of paper, and I've done this about 3 4 times now, and it's really interesting the results I see. So we have like blank pieces of paper throughout the class, and every child has like things in front of them, like a picture in front of them, and they draw a line down the middle. And on the board I write do's and don'ts in Islam, and on the paper
Oh,
the exercises the child has to write what what is allowed in Islam, the do's, and what is not allowed in Islam. And in the end, well, I try to, if it's not the case where the child has more do's than don'ts, I will tease it out of the child. Like there are more do's than don'ts. But at the end, I get everyone's paper
yeah,
together and I go down the do's list and the don'ts list. And I'm like, look, the don'ts list are limited. Allah allows us to do more things than not do more things. Do you understand? So this idea
yeah,
that the children really early on are enshrined with, which is, wrong. Islam is about not doing this and not doing that and not doing. There was actually this TV program stuff where it was. I actually saw it on like a little clip of it. Where there was this
mm,
child from Syria. He started a school and he was a refugee and he came in and he was explaining his religion. And this is what
mm,
a child in year 7, and obviously he's new to the language, English language, and he's explaining what Islam is. And he goes, "Oh, Islam is that you don't eat pork, and you don't do this, and you don't do that, and you don't do that. It's about don't." And
mm,
obviously that brought out to me is this concept of teaching a child things are wrong, right? Is
mm,
sort of like it's not just limited to here in the UK. It's not limited to people of a South Asian background or a Muslim British Muslim background. It's actually a problem globally because
mm.
you have this idea where
True,
you're
man.
teaching a child no, 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 and Islam is about no, no, no. However, the message of the Messenger Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam was something different. He sent Abu Musa al-Ashari and he sent Muaz ibn Jabal to Yemen with a few messages, and he instructed them yassira wala tu'assira, that make things easy for people and don't make things
Mm,
difficult for the people, and don't and
mm,
give them glad tidings. Bashira wala tunaffira. Give them glad tidings and don't be like, oh, you're wrong all the time. And this idea of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and I always try to talk about this as well, how we have everything in the Sunnah, and it's about how we derive it. The idea of positive reinforcement, which is a theory that we have in educational psychology. That I can't remember who the was it Skinner. I think I can't remember, but he had this idea where, you know, having a positive reinforcement has such a positive effect on the child's education, right? If you say to the child, "Oh,
mm,
you give them a treat for doing something well," right? If you give, and
mm,
then they'll do this thing well the second time, like how they train mice to do things. If the mouse, goes in this direction, that direction, right? They'll give the mouse a treat. I don't know if you saw a few last week on the news where this bomb detecting mouse was given like an award. I think it was in Colombia, where the mouse was given the award because the mouse saved so
yeah.
many people's lives potentially. And that's because, and how they trained the mouse was through positive reinforcement. I'm not saying
Mm,
children are mice. I'm just saying that the positive reinforcement method is something that we can use within our own children, giving them
mm,
treats rather than giving them punishments. You know,
yeah.
giving them a
I think
treat for
I
doing
think there's a
something
book.
right.
There's a book. Yeah. You were talking about Skinner. There's a book written by Sean Aker, which is called The Happiness Advantage. I think in there there's a survey of doctors where the doctors were given. So happiness is quite is so he proves that happiness is related to learning. And I think, like, as very often in Muslim educational institutes, pain and torture is, compared to learning. And if you go back to village mentality, like the cow is beaten to go faster, the horse is beaten to go faster. So it kind of makes some kind of sense, but I think sometimes, so there is some maybe validity of beating people to make them do better. But I think, especially Sean Aker,
But
the way he
isn't that
explains,
an animalistic validity, as in animalistic validity?
yeah,
So
I'm
you're
not saying, I'm
treating
not,
children like
yeah, I'm not
animals.
saying, yeah, I'm not saying it's valid, man. Don't you quote me wrong here. So, but
You said there's
happiness. So
some
doctors,
validity.
I'd the doctor. So the research which I like is that there was doctors were obviously doing diagnosis, And when they did diagnosis, they some were given a lollipop to induce happiness, and they had a 20% higher chance of making the correct diagnosis just for inducing happiness like that. And I think we do still have these, like even in Colchester Mosque, Alhamdulillah, one of the elders, he brings chocolates for the kids, and it makes kids feel nice and welcome and happy, especially slightly younger kids. Older kids maybe not, don't find it that exciting. But anyway, I think we're nearing the end, people. And inshallah, Imad, you can conclude, inshallah, or
We can carry on for
what do you
another
think?
10 minutes. I know I said quarter past, but there's a few points about. Remember, we wanted to talk a bit about giving people tips about how to sort of get this
Yeah,
teaching
definitely,
method
man.
right from our own experience, because obviously
Okay.
we're not experts. We're just learning ourselves. I mean,
True.
I was just
Okay.
thinking about how long I've been teaching for. I've been thinking how long I've been teaching for. I'm 24 now. I started teaching when I was like 17 or 18. And it's 6 7 years, it's quite a long time, and teaching is not my full-time job. I do it on a part-time basis. However, I think about how I teach a lot. It's something that I actively think about, like, okay, what do I do right with this kid that I got exponential results? Because with some children I did get exponential results, alhamdulillah, like,
Mm,
really responding really well. And sometimes I
mm,
try the exact same thing with another child, however I don't get the same result. And why is that?
mm,
And it's the understanding that
mm,
children actually work differently. Different children work differently, and the approach towards things. And I think the main idea about teaching that I've understood, and I'm going to give another secret away as well, another 11 plus secret that I use for my own teaching, is when I
mm.
sort of how I approach the 11 plus, and I've been teaching the 11 plus. I'm not a doctor, I'm not an ustad as well. I'm a medical student, right? Year 4. So I'm going to delete that title as much as possible. But what I was trying to say is when I teach the 11 plus, when I teach the 11
Yeah.
plus, I try to look. We have loads of books and loads of things that we used to teach at the 11 plus with, and you have like certain um, objectives that we need to come out with in the end. For example, I have to teach a child what a synonym is, what an antonym is, right? So rather than saying, oh, this is a synonym and blah, 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 learn it, or this is an antonym, it means the opposite word. A synonym means a word like another word. And, let's find an example in the text. Rather than doing that, how I approach it and how I found this really effective with a number of children is I first, talk about basic. This is a theme that I have. So we go into what the child is watching on TV at the moment. So a TV show that the child is watching, and the
Mm,
most recent one I've had was Boss Baby. I don't know if anyone's heard of that. It's a children's TV show, Boss Baby, and from there, we sort of what I did is, okay, tell me about Boss Baby. What is Boss Baby? And the way I teach is I teach online through like the platform of Zoom and using an app called Notability. So I like drawing things out for the children and getting pictures. So what happens is, we go on to what the TV show is about and the characters. And I'll be like, okay, so you have these few characters in the TV show. So you have the little girl, you have the twins, you have the little chubby little child. So what do you call this? And the child will be like, oh, a team. Okay, a team.
mm,
I'm like, okay, what's another word for this? They were like, oh, a group. Oh, can you see that's a synonym because you have a team and you have a group there. So, teaching the child. So I've got the objectives in my head at the end, but it's sort of trying to keep it natural. Obviously, sometimes it has to be
mm,
forced, but sort of teaching the child objectives through the things that the child is interested in. And obviously, this can't be applicable in all contexts. This is just this particular, 11 plus teaching English 11 plus is different to teaching Islam and teaching Quran and teaching Islamic
mm,
studies. But even
mm.
like something in
Yeah,
the
I would
book,
say even
we have.
yeah, I would say even
Go
in
on.
Islam, there's a lot more chance. Like it's so easy to bring it in to make it relevant. I think very often a lot of our curriculums are a bit out of date. They're not relevant for the
Yeah,
British society. Like, I don't really feel comfortable going through many of the books, many of the. I know there's a lot of series which have been made. I don't feel comfortable going through them because I think there's too much force. Then you're just giving information to the kid. Whereas I think
yeah,
Islam, if you're saying it's a way of life, it's got to relate to their life a little bit. But so
yeah,
personally, I found that really easy with gratitude because it's very easy to get every child to think about what's going good in their life, especially if they live in the UK. That's not a hard exercise. So gratitude, dua, and improving their prayer. And I think I've actually been really pleasantly surprised with how actively, like when you bring up the discussion. Let me just say my tip then quickly. My tip is
Okay.
when you're teaching with the kid, um, well, one of the tips is give them autonomy as much as you can. So the thing is, sometimes we say, "I'm the teacher. You must read this, and you must learn this, and you must race," and that might work in a his class in Bangladesh or in Pakistan or something. But when you just take a step back and ask the kid, why am I even here teaching you? What do you want to learn from me? I'm the Imam, by the way. Hopefully they figure that much out. But you're telling me you're the Imam, and you ask them what they want to learn, and you let them decide their own syllabus. That I want to pray nicely, I want to connect with Allah, and very often that's a brilliant place to start. Actually engaging in a conversation, and it actually relates to your point completely because you want it to flow. And the best way to start is say, "Hello, what do you want to do?" And then you just move on to that because they decide the lesson plan basically. The word's autonomy, which is autonomy is an intrinsic motivator anyway. That's more to do with kind of human biology, bit of psychology in there. But when you bring autonomy there, and autonomy is kind of created by curiosity, which is asking the right questions. Anyway, Imad man, we've got a few minutes left, so go on, inshallah. Let's see if
Okay.
there's anything you have.
Autonomy. Alhamdulillah, where I teach in my local mosque, Alhamdulillah, we have really great imams, alhamdulillah. They give myself a lot of autonomy in what I teach. And like you said, you don't agree with the curricula that are set out. Like we have, to name a few, we have the Safar syllabus, we have the An-Nasiha syllabus. I think, they do a really, really good job. The workbooks are really great to set homework for kids, and they have really good tasks and stuff, really imaginative. And I know a lot of money was
Hmm.
put into developing these curricula. But I think for a
Okay.
teacher of Islamic studies, that is a starting point, and you start the discussion from that, and you can move away from that, and what is the kid interested in. For example, I was teaching the in our mosque. I think they do the An-Nasiha syllabus. I know they do the An-Nasiha syllabus. So we do the An-Nasiha curricula. And I'm teaching a group of boys. I think they were like in year 9, year 10. And I know a lot of these kids, they're really good at maths. Some of them are really, really good at maths. And the topic was Islamic inheritance. And there were like 3, 4 pages on Islamic inheritance. And it was just going through the basics of Islamic inheritance. And I thought to myself, there was a book I was like reviewing or reading at the moment at that particular time. This was like a year or two ago, and that was a book on Islamic inheritance and the laws of Islamic inheritance. Rather than studying it in terms of fractions, this author Samiruddin Qasmi actually used percentages and decimals for that. So I was thinking to myself, hold on, if I spend like a
Hmm.
couple of weeks or 2, 3 weeks going through like this method and going through, because he has a question-based system in teaching Islamic inheritance, mirath, and he has like these 20
Hmm.
questions, and he says based on those 20 questions you can deviate from these 20 questions, you can answer any sort of problem that you have in when distributing inheritance. And I thought these kids are doing
Hmm.
algebra, some of them, and if I can teach them, and I knew this is another kind of problem with teaching as well. To what level do you teach? Do you teach to the level of the weakest child in the class, or do you teach at the level of the most intelligent child in the class? And I think truly and honestly there's no right answer for this, and it's about balancing between the two. So you would have an objective that you teach everyone, but you
Hmm.
can push those children to the limit of their ability.
You've gone quiet, Imad. Imad, you've gone a bit away from the mic. Can't hear you. Can't hear you. Can't hear you. Still can't hear you. Still can't hear you. I can't hear you. I don't think.
How,
You, now I got a bit of
how
you.
about now?
Yeah, that's
Can you hear me
better.
now?
Yeah, I think you're back. Yeah, you're back. You're
Okay,
back.
yeah, okay.
So,
So it's about,
just to understand,
okay,
so if you're teaching a class, how do you
yeah.
keep everyone at the same thing if you've got clever and not clever?
So obviously I don't claim to have the most optimal method, but I think, having objectives
Yes, you do.
that, huh? Okay. So, okay.
Okay.
Obviously I'll be biased and say obviously what I'm doing now. I see it being effective, but I don't claim to have the most effective method because
mm,
someone else might have a more effective method, maybe that I'm not aware of. But to my knowledge
mm,
and experience, I think this is a good method that you have objectives in your mind or written down of what you want to teach the whole class and what basic information you need to sort of give to every single child. Like, okay, mirath, inheritance, Islamic inheritance is a obligation upon every Muslim, right? And it has to be, a third of your the estate goes to the burial cost. A third goes to this, a third goes to that. This is the basic information, but the intricacies would be things like, okay, if you have six brothers and one sister, and the person had left a wife behind, then how much does each person get? This would be a secondary objective I would have. So I wouldn't expect the children in the class, all the children in the class, to get the secondary objective. However, I'd expect
mm,
all the children in the class to get the primary objective. So I would
mm,
I would teach them first and give everyone sort of worksheets. And whilst everyone going through the worksheets, you would sort of get those children who you think would benefit and have be able to sort of comprehend the secondary objectives, get them and sort of give them the secondary information, right? And
mm,
that might be why you're not giving it to all the information. Why something goes through, but obviously as a teacher, your children, you know how much they're going to understand and to what level they're going to understand. And I think that's the problem with classes is everyone's on a different level, so how can you relate to every single person in the class, because people might take
mm,
different things from you. So you need to, as a speaker, as a
mm,
teacher, develop a method where you have objectives that you want to disseminate to every single person there, and objectives that people who might take something more from it that they will also get. And I can understand this is very difficult, but at the same time, I think it's achievable with practice.
mm.
And
Yeah,
and
that's
we
good.
think, okay, people,
Mm,
the idea of we I didn't want to mention the word clever and dumb, but you mentioned it earlier. A clever child and a dumb child, and I think this is a problem that we have as well. What is a clever child and what is a dumb child, and I think now we have the understanding that different people have different sort of talents, and no one is truly dumb because
mm,
everyone does have a different talent. Someone asked a few weeks ago, um, I was on my plastic surgery rotation, and someone asked the plastic surgeon who was giving this lecture, some consultant who's millionaire consultant. They asked him, at what point do you know that you're not good at surgery or you're not good at plastic surgery? At what point do you realize this? Or if you've frozen, I don't know if you're still there or not. Just let me know if you can still hear me. The timer's going on, so I'll just continue. I hope you can hear me. So he said, someone asked a question to him, at what point do you know that you're not good at surgery, that you haven't got the hand for it, that you physically can't do it because you haven't got the hands for it? And he said something really profound, and like I wrote it down as well. He said, um, with the right guidance, mentoring, and teaching, with the right, okay, Habib's gone, but I'll just finish off this point and we'll wrap up. So the plastic surgeon said, with the right guidance, mentoring, and teaching, you know, you can be trained to do anything. You can physically be trained to do anything. So I think it's really important that we don't have this vision that we can't do something. We don't have the vision that we can't do something. Rather, with the right guidance, training, and mentoring, you can achieve anything. Habib, you cut off there.
yeah, sorry, I cut
Did
off for
you?
a bit.
Okay, no worries.
I
I was
think
just
by
mentioning what
internet.
what what the surgeon said. A surgeon that was a
Yeah.
teacher of mine. He mentioned that someone's asked him.
So yeah.
Someone asked him that at what point do you realize you haven't got the hands for it to be a surgeon,
Mm,
and that's not for
yeah.
you. And he said if you start early enough with the right guidance, training, and mentoring, no one cannot be good at it. To
Yeah.
just to paraphrase him in that sense.
Mm,
So I think it's really important
yeah.
that and I think the final thing I'd like to mention is regarding the space repetition, because we've been talking about this for a long time. Space
Yeah.
space repetition and the Ebbinghaus forgetting curve. So I don't know how this would have fit into the conversation anyway. It does actually fit into the conversation, as in space repetition is a method that is an age old method, people think, oh yeah, spaced repetition is this new technique where it's mentioned in the book to make it stick, and loads of like YouTubers have spoken about this, productivity YouTubers, spaced repetition. However, we know spaced repetition is an age-old technique. Now, what is spaced repetition? Spaced repetition is how children, I myself was taught on how to memorize the Quran. So initially, you would memorize a portion of the Quran, and then you would go over the portion of the Quran that you had memorized yesterday and then the day
Mm.
before. And you would what do they call it again? Madik Sabak Sipara, right? Or Sabak
Sabak
Para.
innit?
These
Sabak
no
para
the
door.
the yeah, the sabak is you're memorizing at the moment.
Mm.
So say
Mm.
one page is my sabak that I'm memorizing. The sabak
Mm.
sipara is the day before what I memorized, and the day before that, and the day before that, like 3 or 4 days before that, and
Mm.
you join it together, and you're kind of rememorizing that, so it becomes stronger in your memory. And then you have
Mm.
door as well, like the Mahdi Ba'id, which is the stuff that you memorized, the your memorization from a while back, and you split that up.
Mm.
So this is in essence spaced repetition. What it's about? Spaced repetition is where you have, and I wish I could get the curve up. If I wasn't in the car, I could get this curve up. Maybe you could have shared it on the screen. The Ebbinghaus forgetting curve. Can you
Mm.
get it on the screen? Or
Not
we
now,
don't have
man.
the okay.
Cause
Okay, we don't have the feature. Okay, maybe another time. But how it works is when you learn something, you retain a certain
yeah.
percentage of it, and then you forget it. But when you relearn it, you retain a greater percentage of it. And then when you learn it for the third time, you retain a greater percentage of it. Then when you learn it fourth time, fifth time, you get a greater percentage of it. So it's like these cycles of learning the same thing, right?
Mm.
And cycles of learning the same thing, obviously, it's a lot more than that. But this is a
Mm.
great way to sort of enshrine something in your memory and embed something in the memory. And
Yeah.
we
I
have this
think
idea.
again
Okay.
to do that to do this idea of spaced repetition, I think it relies a lot on your theory about using positive reinforcement as opposed to negative reinforcement. Because if you're using negative reinforcement, the whole idea of repeating something you already know is going to be tedious. And if you
Mhm.
take somebody back, this whole door concept in people who are not doing hivs, the concept of door, doing revision of something you already know, is a painful experience very often. And I find this, like, if you tell somebody to recap Surah Al-Fatiha, they're like, I know that. And even like surahs which they don't know very well, like the last 10, for example, when you're teaching kids, they'll find it painful to recap, which can sometimes actually be really negative, because again it comes down to that the way that mistakes were perceived. And now this is not just a mistake, this is moving backwards technically. And parents get angry. So obviously when I take on a new child, they usually move 3 or 4 stages back, yeah, in terms of their Arabic reading, because the quality
Yeah.
is not good enough, and parents
Yeah.
get annoyed. So again, if we can develop that mindset of, instead of using negativity to push the child forward, we try and use positive reinforcement, and that way you're actually going to find that the child is falls in love with the whole process of learning. They fall in love with mistakes, which is, like we said earlier, where the learning actually happens. But anyway, sorry, Ahmad, man. Yes, what are you saying?
Yeah. No, I really like the idea of falling in love with a mistake, which is obviously sounds kind of paradoxical almost. How can you sort of fall in love with something that's holding you back? But if we see mistakes as something that don't hold you back but push you forward, then I think
Mm.
that's the method to sort of not just for children. I think as adults as
Mm.
well, as adults as
but
well.
but
Like,
but mistakes, I mean, it depends how you've been brought up to see mistakes, really. Because how does a mistake hold you back? Like, why would you even say that? How failure doesn't hold you back. Like, if we all died and we looked back on our lives, you were telling me this, our original phone call when we were planning to move to America. Like, when we die, we're not going to look back on our lives and think, oh yes, I'm really glad I didn't try, and I stayed safe. We're going to look back and think, do you understand? We're never going to be that. It's going to be the opposite. We're going to be, every time we fail, that's like an achievement, essentially. And I think like I think even in the wording that you just used, it's become ingrained in our society, kind of that mistakes are kind of a bad kind of thing.
I think for children, I think what I meant by mistakes holding you back is, mistakes have negative consequences. If I make a mistake, I'm not going to go to break. If I make a mistake, I'm gonna have to stand up because that's kind of the punishment that we use. What's funny
Hmm.
is the kids now, which I used to originally teach, they're like, oh, when you make someone stand up because they go, they'll be like, oh, can I stand up? The other kid will be like, oh, can I stand up? Can I stand up? And
Yeah.
it's no longer a punishment.
Hmm.
It's
Yeah.
funny how the kids there are teaching the teacher in a way. I think they are teaching the
Yeah.
teacher that so what, standing up is not really a bad thing. You
Hmm.
can't. You're associating negativity with standing up. But I thought this as well. I can stand up for a long period of time. But when I'm
Hmm.
thinking about I'm standing up and I'm conscious I'm standing up, oh, then maybe I want to sit down. You know,
Hmm.
so the whole standing up. I don't know if there's been any studies about it, but the whole standing up thing, can be taken both ways as well. Like, it
Uh-huh.
can be sort of a thing where you associate negativity to it. Oh, I've been standing up for a long time. Also, it can be,
Hmm.
a normal thing. You can stand up for such a long time, and you can take information while standing and take information while sitting. What's the optimum
Hmm.
position for absorbing information?
I don't know.
I don't know either. I
But
don't know either.
I think
What is the
I don't
optimum?
think. Yeah, I don't think there's any negativity. The thing is, it depends more on your state of mind rather than the
Yeah.
position. I think. So if you can, like I know some people might be sitting in the most relaxed position, whatever that means, but their mind will be all over the place. So it won't. But I think I think going forward, because a lot of our work in most jobs is kind of um, like sitting down kind of work. I think the opposite is to stand up, try and get as many, like, because I don't think we move around enough. Yeah, I think that we as a
Mm,
human species in this country, especially, we don't have enough moving around. So the more you can stand up, the more helpful it will be. Because the seating, like, I'm sure you're aware of the human anatomy, um, but the actual way we're meant to sit is quite difficult. Like, I don't think anybody can actually pull it off, like sit in a chair actually upright. So they end up slouching. And very often, an
yeah.
easier solution to that is actually standing up and just,
Yeah.
standing up, making sure you're put a box on the table and put your laptop on top of the box and make sure you're standing. I spent too much time in Costa over the past few weeks. So, I'm not sure how good that's been for my position.
I mean, you can get these standing up there. I went to my cousin's house a few weeks ago, and
Hmm.
mashallah, he works. He works as an engineer. He's working up from home now, and he bought this desk. He like was really excited to show me. Like he had like a
Hmm.
standing up desk where all his screens are down. He's standing up, and when he wants to
Hmm.
sit down, he can adjust the kind of, what do you call it, the up and downy thing, the
Oh,
the little stick to go down. So if he wants to sit, he can sit. But then when he wants to stand up again, he can stand up again. And I think it's just that
yeah,
that change. Just change things up a bit. I think with learning, it's really important that you change
hmm,
things up because you don't know what your
yeah. But
optimal
then,
method of learning is.
but I think even yesterday, like one thing which I find works well is actually breathing. So on our beautiful Mabahith group, Al
Yeah.
Mabahith al Fiqhiyah, there was a question yesterday about meditating. And I think again that was a bit of a silly question, but I think like even just by focusing on your breath, that can put you in a state of heightened awareness. And obviously, there's different states of mind. I'm not sure how much you've studied neurology, but you can have alpha, beta, theta. You can go
Oh,
deeper,
mashallah.
and when you're deeper, what man?
You
When
give
you're
me
deeper,
nightmares. You give me nightmares of neurology. I have
if
neurology
you can
nightmares.
if you can slow down the speed of your brain, you can actually you can cut out all your judgment. Like, so for example, if I say to a kid, so you know when this lockdown happened, a lot of kids I
Yeah.
worked with, they were like, I've got this much homework to do, this much. Like, sorry, I don't know how much, this much. Lots as wide as my hands can go without getting out of the screen. And I'd be like, okay, so what's the homework? So when you get into the question, if you actually get to the point what they need to do, it's not actually that complex. They need to maybe write an essay or do a dissertation, or what, they need to answer a practice exam paper or something. But when it's in their mind, they've got so much judgment about it. It's like this scary, impossible thing. But in reality, what they've got to do is start off by answering the the C grade question at the front of the 2009 practice paper, which is actually quite an easy start. But it's just that perception, and sometimes by moving your brain into different states, that can be very useful. Although that's maybe slightly advanced. We need to
That is
end Imad.
interesting. Okay, yeah, we're gonna. I told you. Remember, I was like, oh yeah, well let's do half an hour, 45 minutes, and then
Okay,
I told
inshallah.
you
Inshallah, we'll do it
when we start talking, we just continue. Maybe we need a part two of
inshallah.
this because we didn't even
Inshallah.
get
Yeah,
onto modes of learning, as in the theories
yeah,
of how like how do we apply the theories of learning and a
yeah.
kinetic learner, visual learner, an auditory learner, and how we can as teachers deliver
Mm.
information to
And I think,
cater
yeah,
for all the different types of learners.
for next week, I want to be more direct to parents. So
Yeah,
not trying to keep a class together, but just that one kid. Like, I think one of the things I learned is, you said the student ends up teaching the teacher when the kid tells them to stand up. I think as parents think that their kids are like these precious little things which they need to protect in the world. Whereas in reality, the kids are the teachers. The kids are on the fitrah. The kids are the ones who are going to bring like life into us, and they
yeah,
end up teaching
subhanallah, yeah.
parents. And very often we don't realize how much of a miracle kids are. Kids are unmessed up. We're all messed a bit because of society and our parents and the world. We weren't brought up in perfect households.
But
But the
when do you
kids
make that transition? When do you make that transition from being a kid to an adult?
next week, man, inshallah. Jalla jazakallah, Imad, man. That was
The
really
final,
good. Alhamdulillah.
a
Really
final point I
enjoyed
just
that.
want to mention. A final point I just
The
want to mention.
comments. Go on then.
I mean,
Mention it then.
I was gonna say, so I was having this conversation with my uncle who's 40 years old, and he said to me,
Mm,
Imad, you know what? In maturity, I'm probably like a year or two older than you.
mm,
And the truth is, when I was 10, 12, 13, 14 years old, and I would think,
mm,
a 24-year-old, well, I'm 24 now, I think, oh, what must the level of thoughts be? What must the level of maturity be? And I know,
mm,
we don't have like a standard to level to kind of understand our own level of maturity, but I don't think I've matured that much. When you
mm.
when you think about it. So when do you make that transition between a child and an adult, or a kid mind
But
and an
then
adult
I think
mind?
this is very interesting, because this is deep, man. Because once upon a
Yeah,
time, it used to be like there's a point in your life where you're suddenly self-responsible,
yeah,
and you move out, and
yeah,
suddenly like all the burdens on your head. That doesn't happen anymore that much.
yeah. I think
So
it's
I
a
think
continuum.
it's become blurred. Yeah,
Yeah, I
definitely.
think it's a continuum. Yeah.
Hmm. Chalo, okay, Jazakallah, Imad. And
Okay,
definitely, I think
inshallah.
we want to go. I think you can think about what you want to share next week. We can maybe be a bit more clear even before we do next week on the exact points we want to stick to, maybe. And we can go off, obviously. But that way, inshallah, next week we can maybe be slightly more focused on specific points. So we can maybe tell our many viewers what they can expect, inshallah.
How many
And we can
viewers do
add,
we have? I can't even see. I can't see
I think,
anything or the comments or
oh,
anything.
uh, I think maximum we had about eight, nine. We
Okay.
had 10 at one point,
Okay, fair
and then
enough.
throughout we maintained about five or six. So
Okay,
probably a
that's
total of
fine.
about 12 to 15 people altogether,
So
inshallah.
we're gonna keep this unscripted, right? As we are going on.
Yeah, unscripted, but I think
Okay.
the topic. I think what we'll learn is how to decide a topic. Inshallah, we'll learn how to do this thing. One of my favorite ways of doing things in the world is actually rapid prototyping, which is a separate thing, but we can discuss that some other time. Okay, assalamu alaikum
Okay.
warahmatullah. Jazakallah everyone for being here. And next week, 7:30 on Monday, inshallah. And next week we've got Dr. Imad again, inshallah. Um, and yeah, assalamu alaikum warahmatullah.
Alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.